First of all, it's a great zchus to partner with Rabbi Gottesman. Actually, partner is the wrong word. He does the work. I have the pleasure, but I thank you for sharing your pleasure with me. And the Rasham should help us. We continue learning mitach simcha and mitach gishmak. One of my fondest memories of my childhood, when I was a young child, the first child that I encountered, and I mean this seriously and literally, was what we knew as the Brooklyn Public Library books. Now, for those who are my age, then the public library was someplace that a Yid was allowed to go in. Now, unfortunately, there's too much going on there that we shouldn't be seeing. But it was an innocent shaila. We took out a book from the library, and typically on the side of the page was stamped prominently Brooklyn Public Library. So during the week, you're allowed to read the book. The question is, on Shabbos, as you can see, it was written on the side. I didn't bring a book from the library, that would be stealing. But imagine this lettering written on the side of the page, and it says Brooklyn Public Library, stamped onto the side of the pages. When you open it, the assumption is you are erasing that writing. When you close the book, and now it is once again legible, you're writing that. So the question, my first question as a young child was, are you allowed to read these books on Shabbos? Because opening the pages would be disrupting the writing, that presumably would be mechika, and closing it would be ksiva. Now this apparently was a age-old question. I guess there wasn't library books, but the Levush, and it's noteworthy, please note this bit of information, Levush was a Talmud of the Ramah, and Levush in his Sefer, in Shin Mem, discusses this very question. Are you allowed to open a book or a Sefer that has lettering on the side? Incidentally, a few weeks ago, a boy in the Yeshiva asked me this question. His Gemara had writing on the side, his name. Can you use that writing on Shabbos or Yom Tov? So the Levush marshals proof from a psak of the Ramah, his illustrious Rebbe in Shin Mem Siv Gimel. The Ramah quotes from the Mordechai that someone who has lettering on a cake, like Rabbi Gottesman showed us, the chazak cake, you're not allowed to cut that lettering because that is meichik. The assumption is that the lettering as it is on the cake is legitimate writing, and by cutting the cake, you're actually destroying the lettering, and that would be a form of mechika. The chiddush, of course, is that there's mechika by food, which shouldn't be much of a chiddush, because if it has the halachic status of writing, then obviously destroying that would be the malacha of mechika. Says the Levush, based on the Rebbe's words, I would extrapolate that one would not be allowed to open or close the lettering, the book that has lettering on the side. But he says it's really double trouble, because by opening it, you're erasing the lettering. By closing it, you are writing it. In other words, my Rebbe prohibited cutting lettering on cake. That would be mechika. But in a sefer, a book that has lettering on the side, it's double trouble. It's both mechika and ksiva. That is the assumption of the Levush. So basically, when I was a child, what we did, I don't think it was really helpful, but we put some type of paper in between the sefer like this. So the assumption was it wasn't legible as it was. So then opening it, you weren't really erasing it anymore because the papers already had done that action of making it illegible. Lamaisa, some people might not open a sefer all on Shabbos, a chashash, they might open such a sefer, which of course is unfounded. But basically here we have this chiddush of the Levush, opening a sefer is mechika and closing it is ksiv. However, the Taz takes strong exception. And the Taz writes that Lamaisa, I don't agree. And he says something that is extremely, extremely important in contemporary life that we live, the many shilas, and it's an important definition of the word ksiva. And the Taz basically is giving us a tremendous insight of the definition, the accurate halachic definition of ksiva. Is ksiva writing literally, writing two letters? Or perhaps if you have two written letters and you put them together and you form a word, that would also constitute ksiva. And I brought this to illustrate. I have a little cube that says an A, another cube that has a T. Pre-written, this is actually from a Scrabble game. And you put the A and the T together, as you could see, and now you have the word at. I guess I'll focus a little closer so you can see the word at. There you go, at. The question that Taz asks is, how do you define ksiva? Do you have to take a pen and write it? Or if you have pre-written letters and you form them and you combine them to write a word or two, that would also be ksiva. And you have no idea how important this question really is, because today they sell lettering, Shabbos lettering. It's like I have these tiles with A's and B's, and it has a magnetic backing, and you can put a message on the refrigerator, and you could spell out a whole Langa Megillah. You can write out a message with these pre-written letters. You're not writing the letters, but you're forming writing with these little cubes that have lettering on it. The question is that considered ksiva or not? You know, it's interesting. The Stipler never took people on Chalamoid. He never saw people because Stipler was unable to hear. The only way you communicate is if you wrote. You wrote like a kvittel and he read it, but he didn't allow writing a Chalamoid. So basically, the Stipler had vacation on Chalamoid. One fellow was a very aggressive fellow, and he wanted a bracha from the Stipler. He went to the shul, and they have the signs by the chazans on it, the same bracha. He took it out of the post, walked over to the Stipler and held it up, the same bracha, and the Stipler laughed and said, "You got me, and you're getting a bracha." But that's not ksiva, because the same bracha is totally written. Our question is, if you take the vav and the saf and the nun and combine it, and you might make the word the same, is that considered ksiva? So the Taz points to a Gemara in the Mishnah in Shabbos Kuf Dalet, where the Mishnah says to qualify for the malacha of ksiva, a person has to write two letters. But, says the Gemara, if you wrote one letter on one wall, another letter on a different wall, it's not ksiva d'oraisa, because you didn't make a word. Even though it's on, you wrote two letters, but you can't combine two walls. But, says the Gemara, if you wrote one letter in Tveria on a piece of paper, one letter in Sipiri on a piece of paper, so now you have two pieces of paper, you have two letters on them. One has an A and one has a T. Says the Gemara, that's chayiv on Shabbos because you wrote a word, two letters. It's an A and it's a T in different places. So says the Gemara, all you need to do is combine the two papers together, and then you have an A and a T. So essentially, when you wrote an A and a T, before they were put together, it's already writing. Because it's only Mechusa Kreva. All you have to do is put it together, and big deal. Mechusa Kreva doesn't need much. So what constitutes writing, says the Taz from the Gemara? Writing letters. But putting pre-written letters together is not ksiva, because the ksiva took effect when you wrote the A and they wrote the T. As the Taz, we see a very fundamental concept that ksiva is writing. Kreva, taking two pre-written letters and putting them together, again, with these little cubes would be the same thing. You take the A and you take the T and you put it together, and now you have at. That would not be ksiva. The writing was when I wrote the A and the T, but putting the two letters together is not ksiva. So therefore, reasons the Taz. That's why the levush is incorrect. When you have lettering on the side of the page, the person that wrote it originally was maybe chayiv as far as ksiva is concerned, because he wrote the letters. But when I close it and now it's formed, again, when I close it, all I did was kreva. And the Gemara clearly implies that kreva is not considered ksiva. Ksiva is writing, not bringing close together. So basically, the Taz says from the Gemara, we see that the levush is incorrect. Writing means writing, and taking pre-written letters and putting it together does not constitute ksiva. And this is the shita of most poskim. The Rav Shulchan Aruch says, like the Taz, and actually we'll soon see the Ramah himself in the Tshuva says the same tzvar. And as the Chayodim points out, the Taz Beroichav Binasai, with its tremendous insight, was mechaven to the Ramah's Yisoid. In fact, the Yavitz, please note this name, that also be important. The Yavitz writes, it's so pashut like the Taz, don't waste your words, don't waste your time discussing it. It's pashut that taking letters and putting them together, closing a book and forming letters is not considered ksiva. It was written long ago. Then we have a second important svara, and I'm not just trying to fill the time, obviously, because each of these svaras are going to be the base for various of our contemporary questions. The Knesset Gdoila writes that the minig is to open svarim that have lettering on the side of the page, not like the levush. Why isn't it mechika? When you open it, you erase it. Says the Knesset Gdoila, mechika means when you erase something and it is mochuk, it is totally erased. For example, on a blackboard, you erase what's written. That's mechika. On the cake that we saw on the screen earlier, that when you cut the lettering and destroy the lettering, it's gone. That's mochuk. Or to give you an example, you might relate to this from your childhood. We used to write on a magic slate, which basically was a slate, and you wrote on it, and you could see it. When you finished writing, you picked up the plastic, and it got erased. Actually, it was a simple erasure, but it lifted up, and everything was erased. That's all mechika. Mechika means if it's erased permanently, it's gone. Says the Knesset Gdoila, when you open the pages, and now it looks erased, but it's not gone. How do I know it's not gone? Because when you close it, there it is. The lettering is there. Says the Knesset Gdoila that mechika is if it's erased permanently. By lettering on the side of the page, when it's open, it's not erased permanently, because when you close it, it's back to where it started from. Mechika is only a permanent erasing, not something that is done on a temporary basis. The third svara, and this will impact computers and those type of shilas, was written by the Marash Halevi in Siman Chavav, and he writes with tremendous derech eretz to levush, but he says that levush is not right. And listen to an incredible svara. Again, has an important impact on our modern shilas. Says the Marash Halevi, when you erase something, it has to be a ksiva, it has to have a shem ksiva, and you erase it, that's mechika. But when you look at this side of the pages of a book, now I wish I had writing on it, but it's not mine, so I can't write in it. But there's no writing. You know what it is? If you would see, imagine writing along the sefer. It's not like writing like over here. You could see Kol Yaakov. Here, you wrote it onto the pages. So each page has a little dot. There are 500 pages in a formation, and it says in it, Beis Medrash Pliny. So it gives you the impression that it's written on the sides of the page. But really, if you look at each page individually, there's one dot. So this writing had to be writing on the side of the pages is 500 dots on 500 pages that combines to give the image as if it's written. But unlike this writing that is clearly writing, here, as you call it, it's chudin dakin. It's small little dots that held together gives the impression of writing. You know what that would be like? I'll give you a very good example. That would be like someone that the old-fashioned movies that used to go with showing page after page after page after page. So it's basically just a relay of pages. So too over here on the side of the page, it's just showing that dot after dot after dot, but you can't classify this as ksiva because all it is chud and dakin. And if it's chud and dakin, it does not have the din of ksiva. If it's not ksiva, it's not mechika. In other words, the party cake that was written with icing has a din ksiva. And of course, lettering on a page or on a blackboard are all ksiva. But this does not have the halachic status of ksiva. And to quote the slang term, if it ain't written, you can't erase it. If it doesn't have the halachic status of a ksiva, it can't be mechika. True, he says, nirin oisi shleimois, but lefio emes is only chud and dakim that does not have the concept of ksiva. I'll give you a mashal l'saber sa'oizen, of course. Imagine if you see someone is a very gifted pilot, and he knows how to make, he's a skywriter, and he could write Shem Hashem with puffs of smoke. You look up, wow, Vkevovke. That wouldn't be considered writing a Shem Hashem. And if someone blows in it and it gets erased, no one will say that's Mechika Shem Hashem. Because all it is dots in the air. It's like, someone has the ability to make a formation of bees that fly in formation, looks like Shem Hashem. That wouldn't be Shem Hashem because it's independent dots in the air or independent bees. Well, he is saying that it's dots on the side of the page doesn't have the status of ksiva. And one final point that we must know before we apply this lemaisa is the words of the Ramah. Now, this is ironic because the Ramah discusses this very question that is Talmud the Levush discusses. And the Levush says it's asa based on his Ramah, on his Rebbe, the Ramah's psak regarding cake, but he was unaware that his Rebbe had written a tshuva about it. Now today that would be unheard of. How could a Talmud not know his Rebbe's psak? But in the olden days, the printing was very scarce. Svarim were very rare, and I assume the Levush didn't have the Tshuvas Ramah like we have. He never saw it. But his Rebbe, the Ramah, discusses the question of lettering on the side of the page, and he says what has become a classic yisoid in Hilchos Shabbos. Basically, what the Ramah says is that something that is made to open and close doesn't have the status of ksiva when it's open, closed, and when you close it, that's not considered ksiva. In other words, and let me explain where he's coming from. If someone has an open area in his wall on his house, the window fell out. So of course you can't put a window back into its place. That would be Moisev ala binyan. If someone's door fell off the hinge, so you can't replace the door, that would be Moisev ala binyan. You're adding a door to the house. But as the halacha is, a door that's on the hinges, that's operating perfectly, you're allowed to open and close. Why? Why is that the same problem? By closing the door, you're adding a closed door. By opening the door, you're taking away the door. Why is it mutter to open and close a door that's attached, but you're not allowed to add a door that's detached? Says the Ramah, the Yisayid is very simple. If something is attached and it's made to open and close, so when it's open, it's not broken, and when you close, you're not fixing it. That's the normal mode of use. That's the normal hishtamshus to open and close. To give you a very good example of that, we know in Hilchos Shabbos, actually, it overlaps the Hilchos Sukkah. You're not allowed to put a shlak. In many instances, you can't put a shlak to cover the sukkah because that would be a problem of making an oil on Shabbos. Of course, you put it flush onto the schach is mutter, but if you put it a tefach above the schach, you can't put a shlak on covering the sukkah. But many people have these movable shlaks. They have a pulley system and they put it up, put it down, and pick it up. Why is that mutter? So this is the same Ramah, and this is the end of Taf Reish Chavav in Hilchos Sukkah, where the Ramah says that you can't push shlak on Shabbos or Yom Tiv al Moisfala oil. But if the shlak is attached to a pulley system with hinges, it goes up and down, that's perfectly mutter. It's the same aside. The issa is putting something on, attaching something. Once it's attached, it's made lenoyel v'liftoyach. It's made to open and close. That would not be a problem. Therefore, reasons the Ramah that the same principle applies to lettering on the side of the page. Because since the sefer or the book was made to open and close, so when the book is open, we won't say it is erased, because when you finish learning or you finish reading the book, you close the book and now it's written. So the point is, when the book is open, it is not nimchak, it's not erased. And when the book is closed, it's not written. It's made to open and close, no different than a door of a house or a shlak of a sukkah. That's asui liftoyach v'lenoyel, and therefore it's not siva and it's not mechika. In other words, again, to quote that slang term, if it ain't broke, you can't fix it. If it's not broken, if the door's not broken, so there's no issa of fixing it. And using the same thing for the book. If the book, when it's open, is not erased, because that's the normal way of using it. So when the book is open, I wouldn't say it's erased. And when I close it, I wouldn't say it's written. That's the way to open and close. Now, just to give you a little of a glimpse into the beauty of halacha, how this svara that seems to be sort of an outdated svara about lettering on the side of the page, this has such a tremendous impact in modern life. The Heilige Chazon Ish wrote in Siman Nun B'Sefer that one of the problems that he had with using electricity on Shabbos is baina and soisa, because when the appliance is off, so then it's dysfunctional. When you put it on, you're making it functional. So putting on an appliance, besides the other issues, is a problem of baina, and closing it is soisa. That's one of the Chazon Ish's yisaidis regarding electricity. Shlomo Zalman in the Mincha Shlomo Siman Yud Aleph. Now, I would not say he argues on the Chazon Ish. The Zalman's total submission, his bittul to the Chazon Ish, is legendary. He writes in one place that in his lifetime, when Chazon Ish was alive, I was afraid to argue with him. But now, Gedolah Tzadikim b'miksasam, my knees shake and my whole body quakes as I think of his greatness. I don't argue on Chazon Ish. But he does disagree, and he says that it can't be that using an appliance, putting it on is baina and closing it is soisa, because an appliance is a contemporary asul l'noyel v'liftayach. When you close the light, you don't say the light is broken. When you put on the light, you don't say I fixed the light. That's the normal way of use. It's no different than opening a shlak, or opening lettering on the side of a page, or opening a door. In other words, the Reb Shlomo Zalman applies the principle of made to open and close to this question of electricity. That when the appliance is off, it's not broken. When you put it on, it's not fixed. It's not broken or fixed. It's the normal usage of that item. I'll give you another fascinating example. There are glasses, they still have it today, maybe they have a fancier name, but the Moshe refers to them as photo gray glasses. Basically, they're regular glasses, but they have the ability, when you go into a sunny area, a tint covers over the glasses. Actually, it's a modern way of bringing color into a clear glass. So basically what you're doing is you're being tzeveya, your regular glasses, and turning them into sunglasses. When you go into a shady area, so the tint goes away and you're back to your regular glasses. So the Esra Moshe, are you allowed to wear these sunglasses? When you're going into a sunny place, you're coloring them. That's tzeveya. So Moshe said this same principle. It's made to change from glasses to sunglasses and vice versa. So no one's going to say that it's broken when it doesn't have the tint, and when it's tinted, it's fixed. It's basically the normal mode of use, backwards and forwards, this way and that way. And therefore, that would not be malach of tzeveya. That would be a simple application of made to use it in different fashions. Another fascinating example, Rabbi Gottesman spoke about thermometers. We'll get to his question soon. But I'm talking about the old-fashioned thermometer that you use it and you take someone's temperature. So let's say you have someone in the house that's not well, So you take his temperature. Oh, he has a little fever. He has 101. Okay, let's see. Let's take his temperature later in the afternoon, see how he's doing. You can't do that because if right now it reads 101, so you can't take his temperature because you won't get an accurate reading. So what do? If you still remember this, you would shake down the thermometer, bring it down to lower than 98, and then you would take the temperature again, and then you would get an accurate reading of the person's temperature. So there are Gedalia Paiskin that held that this simple act of shaking down the thermometer, bringing it down from 101 to normal or below normal, is considered tikkun mana, because the thermometer in its current state of 101 is unusable, is dysfunctional. You can't use it because you won't get an accurate reading. When you shake it down, now it's usable. So you're fixing a broken item. So shaking down the thermometer would be tikkun mana. However, Rav Ozan the Tshuva, the Shmir Shabbos, Minchas Yitzchak, and Tzitz Eliezer all say, no, that's incorrect. It's not broken when it reads 101. That's the normal use of the item. So it's no different than a door that's made l'noyvel l'ftayach, or a shlak, or anything that's made to use this way, and then you have to shake it down. So again, it's the same concept that the thermometer is not broken when it's unusable. It's just now in the current state, you have to just reset it, realign it, so to speak. So we're getting a lot of mileage on this svara of the noyvel l'ftayach. It works for electricity, for glasses, for thermometers, for shlaks. And as the Ramah himself says, the same principle applies to lettering on the side of the page. And again, when you think about it, it's so easy to understand. When I open this, it's not erased because it's made to open and close. So it's not erased when I open it, and it's not writing when I close it. Now, what's interesting is that the Ramah says this svara, and also says this svara that the Taz says, that it's only Kira voices, it's just taking pre-written letters and putting it together, like the A and T that I show you over here, and that's Kira, that's not Ksiva. But it seems that the Ramah had these two reasons to permit opening a book that has lettering on the side of the page. Now, this leaves us with a very big question on the Lavush, because the Lavush was Machmir, held, he says the Malacha Derais, in fact. What about the Svar of Kirav Isius? What about the Svar of L'Noyvel of Tayach? Says the Avinez and the Tshuva, a brilliant Yesod. From the Gemara, we see if you take letters and put them together, pre-written letters, A and T together, that's not Ksiva. But the case of lettering on the side of the page has one fundamental difference, because it's not that you're putting together letters. You're forming a letter, because there's no letters whatsoever. Maybe everybody agrees, Taka putting together two letters, pre-written letters, A and T, to make a word, that's okay, that's Kirav Isius. But creating Isius by closing a book and putting the hundreds of pages together, and you're writing a letter, is worse. Kirav Isius is okay, but Asiyas Ois might be more chama. That's the Avinez's understanding of why the Lavush is machmer. But either as it may, I must tell you that the halacha l'maisa, it's very hard to accept the Lavush's isser if the Lavush was a Talmud of the Ramah and based his psak on the Ramah's word, and the Ramah himself, in his own tshuva, clearly allowed this very action. So as the Knesset Gdol and others say, if Lavush would have seen his Rebbe's psak, he would have never said it's awesome. And therefore, it makes sense to say, that we could say emphatically, it's mutter to open books or svarim that have lettering on the side of the page, like the shita of almost all the paiskim, the like a Lavush. However, it's interesting, the Mishnah Berurah, when he discusses this question in the beginning of Shin Mem, he says that if you have a different sefer, use the other. So you need a Gemara Gittin, and your Gemara has your name on the side, but you could borrow your friend's Gemara. Borrow your friend's Gemara and don't use your Gemara that has lettering on the side of the page. In honor of the Lavush Shita, even though it basically seems to be Nitcha La'alacha, but the Lavush psak is a psak. Now that's Yiras Shamayim in a very inspiring way. even though the Mishnah Berurah saw the psak would be like the Ramah and Gedolei HaPoskim, but if you could avoid it, let's avoid it. So let's chazar over and we'll apply it to the many, many shilas. So basically we see that ksiv and mechika are serious isurim, and you learned much about it in the previous weeks, I'm sure, previous shurim. But we see an insight that there are really 4 points to consider before we're quick to say asu or mutter. We have the svara of pure voices is not considered ksiva. We have something to say when something is not machuk l'gamri, if it's just back and forth, it's not erased, so there's no machika. Then we have the svara of chud and dak and little dots does not constitute a ksiva. And then we have this very broad concept of the Ramah that it's made to open and close, doesn't have a din of ksiva or machika. Now let's apply it, and I hope you should enjoy it as much as I do to see how the halacha of yesterday is vibrant and responsive, and certainly a nitzchi for today as well. What we saw earlier, that picture of the cake, the chazak cake, that is, you don't need much to realize that why that's problematic. That is mamish our Ramah, because there you have all the problems. It's writing, it's erasing it, it's not made to open and close, and therefore to cut that cake on Shabbos would be a problem of mechika, no doubt about it. There is a heta if you eat this cake, which the place can say, if you destroy lettering as you're eating, but you don't cut it first, so mechika derech achila might be mutter. So if someone really likes this cake and can't resist, I could tell him he could go into the cake head first and eat the cake and eat the ches of the cake and then the zayin. Eating lettering as you're going without cutting it first, there are those that are makel. So basically, derech achil be mutter, but of course that's a very uncouth thing to do. But basically, this cake should not be used on Shabbos. What the eitzah is, if you bought the cake before Shabbos and someone emailed you, you have a problem with Shabbos, you have one of 2 options. What you could do is cut the entire top of the cake off. In other words, take a knife and slice the entire top of the cake, the chazak with those designs. I'm not sure what they are. Looks like anyhow, and cut off that whole thing, and then you can lift up that whole chazak means chazak top, and you cut the cake into slices. This way, you didn't disturb the writing at all.
You cut it like this. Cut it
in between letters.
Slice the whole top off.
Right.
Slice the whole chocolate top off.
Right. That's a very batlanish, but that's the
slices cake to eat the chocolate. That's the whole.
I understand you. That's all. So that's why I said for people living in Elam Hazeh, that would be unacceptable. You're not yaitza the party cake with that. What the eitzah would be before Shabbos, you cut the slices, and then what you have now is by taking it out, that would be the kirb or richa goisius. So that would be somewhat of an issue. Now, that would be of an eitzah. Now, again, it's very, for a anniversary party cake, you give your wife a cake that has cut up cake, you're not yaitza. So I don't advise that, but that would at least alleviate the Hilchos Shabbos issue. Now, the question that I wanted to mention is where many foods, many cookies, tea biscuits, I even noticed someone showed me on Tums, innocent Tums, have written in it Tums, or cookies that has lettering, tea biscuits or brand name. All that is mutter because the lettering is part of the cake itself, as opposed to that chazak cake that the lettering was added by icing. If the lettering was embossed or engraved in the cake itself, or like in Tums, it's embossed in the Tums, or a bedek shaila, ABC alphabet cereal or cookies that are made out of an ABC alphabet cereal, that doesn't have a shem ksiva. If the food is made up into the form of a letter, that would be okay.
So therefore, Oreo cookies are okay because it's
what?
Embossed internally is stamped into the cookie.
Right, or even more so if the ABC alphabet cereal, I'm sure you're familiar, where it's ABC mamish, that doesn't have a shem ksiva.
Even according to Chaznish's mutter?
No, but the Mishnah Berurah is mekel. So if you go with the shita derech achila, that'll be mutter. But the emphasis, I'm sorry. The without the Chazanish, the fact is that it's a ksiva. It doesn't have a shem ksiva. It's an even like the Chazanish be mutter.
Why? Because it's Tmunas Pas or whatever that's.
That's
for.
right. That's right. That's right.
Let's expand that a little bit because we were stuck there. We couldn't figure out what the definition means. What does it mean by Tmunas Pas? What does it
It
mean?
doesn't have a Shem Ksiva. It has a Shem Eichel. And it comes, and it's engraved. I wish I had something to show to you, but you can imagine it as a tea biscuit. If the lettering is in the Eichel itself, then it doesn't have a Shem Ksiva. The nafkamina would be if you first snap the cookie in half, break it, and then eat it. So there's no het of derech achila. But if the word is there's no Shem Malacha of Ksiva or Mechika on something that's the food itself, so that would be okay. That's the way I understood the sugya.
What does the Mishnah Berurah mean when he says mitoicha uga or from outside? The cake that we showed.
The cake that you showed is al gabi.
Clearly outside.
No shaila about it. No shaila about it.
Okay, so what is mutter? What's
okay?
uga?
I'll tell you. If you want to give if you last minute you bake the cake and you have no icing, you could take a knife and write out in it. Of course, it's pretty batlonish. Happy anniversary, and cut lines in lettering onto the cake itself. That would be v'taycha uga. You're not adding anything. You're making the shaping from the cake itself, as opposed to icing.
Even after it's baked, you can create a v'taycha uga.
Why not? Why not? That's what it is.
Okay, we learned v'taycha uga means that it was baked that way, like the srikin matzahs.
Right.
And therefore, it's a chelik of the etzem Michael. If you're doing it after the fact, so you're being the nifel and the poil. Why is that a problem?
If it doesn't have a shem ksiva in the cake itself, I had this question. I learned it also. I didn't look at this recently, but I hear your question. But I think we came out that would be okay. It doesn't have a shem ksiva, but no doubt about it. Someone's asking about the lettering of the alphabet that has no shem ksiva. That you'll have to even break it before you eat it. That would be motivan out the svar of derech achil. Okay, we have a lot to do, so let me continue.
One more thing: is there a difference between breaking it on Erev Shabbos or breaking it on Shabbos?
Why? If you all doesn't have a shem ksiva, why can you break it on Shabbos?
Same thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Same thing. Okay.
Okay. We had an hour. I'm zeichet to go to Camp HaRav. So we had one year. One of the Polish workers, very talented fellow, he made for us a front gate for our camp to close it on Shabbos. We wanted to keep everybody out, and also for the area purposes, the kitzah. He made a gate with two parts of it, and on one part of the gate, it closed as two parts together. It said the letters SHR. On the other door, it said AGA, Shraga, and R was on top of that. It's hard to picture it, but it was a very fascinating shaila. And there was an O on one door, an R on the other door, and the H was made up on both doors combined. So when you closed it, you saw it was written out Ur Shraga. When you open it, you had a SHR on one door, AGA on the other door, and the O on one door, the R on the other door, and the H was right in the middle. So when you open the door, you split Ur Shraga. When you close the door, you had Ur Shraga. So that, as bad as it sounds, would be beferish the Ramah's tshuva, and this is literally not with a chafadimian. This is delas haniftach v'nizgar. Incredible, but this is the Ramah's case of a delas that opens and closes, and therefore it's not.
What about the ambulance stores? Is there all the shaila?
No, the what?
We can put a picture on it. On the doors of ambulances, they have hagdashais and they have writing.
Oh, same thing. Yeah, same idea.
So it's mutter v'damri according to the Ramah.
According to the Ramah.
And levush should be machmer.
Levush. Oh, so that's what I'm thinking. In our case, the H was made up on two different. The one letter H was one part on one door and one on the other one. So then you have the Avinezes svara that you're creating a letter, not just adding letters. You're creating the letter. So if the ambulance has letters that are cut in the middle, the Avinezes svara is pretty gesund that forming one letter by Kiruv we don't see from the Ramah's mutter. Ramah's talking about Kiruv Isius, but perhaps.
Even though the Taz says beferish, there's no difference between half Isius.
Right, of course, but you have to understand the lavush. But from the Ramah, you don't have a
the lavush will be us. Okay, so therefore the half Isius would be more chomer than if it was
right.
Specifically on it. Now let me ask you a question, if you don't mind. I'm sorry to do this to you, but the Islam has been waiting all week to ask these shilas. Back to the cake.
Yeah.
So on the cake, the wonderful Michelangelo created this cake like a Polish guy. if you can put the picture back on, Rabbi Sai, there were two ICS that were stuck together. So even according to the material, even according to the Mishnah Brura, are you having here a problem with cutting the two ICS here? You look, see this chazek.
Yes, I see.
Are you doing the chakak, the ches vasashnei zayunim here? Are you creating two ICS? Were you to cut exactly in between? Another shaila we came up with. By the way, the tziyurim are all there because of a Narish and nursery rhyme. And in order to make the nursery rhyme, they sent out these cakes, which, as the Rav said, is not a lechatchila to send out. You agree with that?
100%. It's a problem. We talk about this, the little area, the saf and the ches.
Yes.
So what are you creating? I mean, if it's
two ICS.
Otherwise, I mean, it doesn't give this wouldn't, since it's a pasla sefer Torah, so it's considered like one letter.
Maybe.
But well, soon here Moshe says if something is legible as it is, it's not considered considered illegible. I think this gives an impression. The perception is that it looks exactly what it's supposed to be. I mean, the truth is a lot of them are the nun and the saf is also connected.
That's right.
It doesn't bother me. I mean, I would read that as separate letters. I'm not in a sefer Torah, but in a party cake, so I think we'll get to that.
We got to Ramesh. Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Let's move on. Okay,
let's take the picture off. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, back to the business. And I see you people learned it wonderfully. It's a great inspiration to be part of this wonderful idea of learning be'iyun. Rav Moshe was asked a fascinating shaila, and that is if shuls that they had, and I've seen this in one of the shuls that I went to, that paroich is not a typical paroich that's one piece. They have paroiches that are made up of two pieces, and you pull the string and the two pieces separate like the two doors open. So I guess Rav Moshe was asked, when you give someone psicha, are you mechaber him a psicha or with Chilul Shabbos? Because he's separating the writing on the paroiches. Obviously, it's something that continues from one side of the paroiches to the other. And typically, you open a whole paroiches, you're fine. But here you're splitting the lettering that is portrayed on the paroiches. So Rav Moshe says that it's mutter, but there's a chashash katan, and that's the levush. Like the levush, it's a problem. So Rav Moshe never really let go of the levush, and he says the real problem, he says, is this is a new innovation. This is chadoshes. Rav Moshe was very sensitive to making any changes on our Matzorah, and he says that for Doris, for generations, the paroiches were made with one piece and don't do it. But basically, this would be similar to what Rabbi Gadazan mentioned, the Hatzalah, whatever, the ambulances that have dashes on it, whatever it may be, it's opening and closing. This is not a door literally, but this is a fascinating analogy to the Ramah. This is not a door. This is actually the paroiches that's being split in half. So that's basically that question, which, as we see, is something very relevant because it's the same idea of opening and closing. Someone showed me on his glasses. I couldn't bring it. I don't have the glasses. But when you folded up the glasses, that you wouldn't notice there's a lettering there. When you open the glasses and you wore them regularly, the designer had his emblem, his design was portrayed on the glasses where it connects between the temple and the glasses itself. So when you fold the glasses, it's no longer the emblem. When you open the glass and you put them on, you could see the emblem very clearly. So that I told him, that's the Ramah, even though it's basically illegible when it's folded, when it's closed, but it's the same Yesod, it's made to open and close. Let me ask you another question, and that might bring us to one of the questions that we mentioned earlier. But I urge you, approach with caution. You come to shul and you're makbid always daven with the siddur. But you're middle of Shemona Esrei, and to your terrible dismay, the page of the Shemona Esrei is torn down the center of it. In other words, this page, let's say it would be torn, and this sefer doesn't have any tears, but let's say it's torn down the center. And it's hard to read it. But what you would do is you could basically align the two pages, the two sides together, and now it looks like it's one, and then you can read the whole page. In other words, it's torn off, it's folded sometimes, so you straighten it out, and now you can read it, but it's really torn. And I do that on Shabbos to align the two halves of the page, and then I can read it from the actual torn two parts of the page. So we're wondering, what's the shaila? I mean, that's Mama who learned. That's made to, it's the heter of a pair of Isis. But I told you there's one factor here. because it's true. The svara of Kiruv Oisius would apply to a torn page of a sefer. But says Rav Moshe, it's not made to open and close. No one buys a sefer to tear it and put it together. So now the question is, when it comes down to it, what's the main svara lahatir? If the svara lahatir is sufficient with the fact that it's Kiruv Oisius, then you're allowed to do that, because I'm only doing Kiruv Oisius. But if the heta is made l'noyav l'ftayach, and this the assumption is not made l'noyav l'ftayach, it would not be permitted to put the two pages together, two parts of the page together, to give it the impression as if it's one, because you're lacking the fundamental svara of made l'noyav l'ftayach. Moshe does say that if l'maisa you could read it as it is, even though it's torn, without putting it close together. So it never lost its status as written. So even though it's torn, it's still considered like a page, as if it's almost whole. So that's what I was telling Rabbi before. If you could read it as it is, so it doesn't need any mechika to recreate it. If it's, again, if the perception is that it's written chazak, chazak, and it's chazek, then I would think that would be considered a ksiva. That's perfect enough, and there would be no touching up that would qualify to be a mechika amanas lichtoi. The next question, which has many ramifications in halacha, is l'chayra, another simple question. They asked Rav Moshe the following, and again, this is an outdated shaila, but it was very relevant probably 50, 60 years ago, when many shuls had bulletin boards. You know, when I give a shir in yeshiva about this, they say, what's a bulletin board? And I guess people your age should know what they're talking about. They have lettering, and you would put it onto the bulletin board, and you would say chachris at this time, and mincha at that time. Can you take pre-written letters, obviously, and attach it to the bulletin board and write out the message or the time that you wanted to write to give over the zmanim for the davening? So l'chayra, that's no different than our sugya. It's taking oisius and kiruv oisius. However, a Moshe in Chelik Aleph points to a Magen Avram. The Magen Avram says if you take lettering and put it onto a frame, it's not a valid get, because for get you need ksiva. But on Shabbos, putting lettering onto a backing would be considered ksiva. Director Moshe, why is that so? If I have pre-written letters, I'm just attaching it to a backing, that's kiruv oisius. Says Rav Moshe, there's a fundamental difference between the typical kiruv oisius and this case. When you have pre-written letters, again, this A and T is a good example, and I put it together to spell a word at, second, and I write the word at, when I put them together, I really didn't do much, because I had A and T, okay, and I put it together, but it's not really connected. But if I were to take this A and attach it to something, to a bulletin board, and then I put the T, and now it writes A and T, but it's permanent, or as long as you leave it there, I did something of permanence. That makes it ksiva. Kiruv oisius is nothing, because you put it on the table, and then you take it off the table. But if you put it onto a backing, that would be a problem. And to give you a contemporary example, if you want to have a party cake on Shabbos, and you forgot to buy a party cake, but you have an icing in the cake without the lettering, you take the alphabet cereal, and you write out happy birthday with the lettering of the alphabet, that's a problem. If you take the same alphabet and make a message to your wife, I went to early minyan, I'll be home at 11 o'clock, and you put the alphabet in formation and you write out lang the Megillah, that is kiruv oisius, that's fine. Because you didn't change anything, it's still letters that happen to be laying on a table. But if you blow it, it's blown away. But if you take that same lettering, the same alphabet cereal, and attach it and put it into the icing, and it has permanence, that would be ksiva. So Rav Moshe is saying that regarding the bulletin board. In a later tshuva, he applies that to the Scrabble game, the popular Scrabble game. And if you take lettering and put it onto the table and you write out words, it's fine. That's kiruv oisius. But if you take the lettering in a deluxe Scrabble and you slide the lettering into a frame that holds the words there and it's there to stay, unless, of course, we take it apart, that would be more significant, and that would be us. And to prove this point, it's noteworthy. The Yaiv, as I mentioned earlier, writes that There's no problem of kiravaisias, and don't waste your time. But in the next words of the Seifa, of the Yavit Seifa, Marketzi on Archaim, he says, but if you take lettering and put it onto a printing press, you put it onto the plate, you put lettering, and you're going to start using it after Shabbos, attaching lettering to a printing press, the old-time printing press, where they actually attach these letters, these characters onto the basis, the backing of it, that's ksiva on Shabbos. What's the chilek? Simple chilek. This is a ksiva that has a permanence to it, has a backing to it, and it has a stick to it, and that's worse. So you see it, Minehu Bay, a Scrabble game that you play on the table, put the letter next to each other, it's fine. Scrabble with the backing is a problem. Putting alphabets, writing out a message as long as you want, taking alphabet and writing out a whole long Megillah is fine. Putting that onto a cake with an icing is a problem. Puzzles, obviously you're not writing any message, but the Rambam says ksiva also includes hatzar tzura. So definitely a puzzle that makes a nice picture might be ksiva. The poskim say if you put the pieces of the puzzle into a frame, which typically they have with the children's puzzles, that's not a problem, because that puzzle has permanence to it. When you keep it, you could keep it as it is as long as you want. Now I asked Rapam Zechayim L'Rocha, why is the mutta als osi l'noyel v'liftoyach? They told me that really it's not true. L'ftach means the same use over and over again. The door, the window, open again, the shlak. But when you play a game of puzzles, you make a puzzle, and then you take it apart, the next game is not a chazar of the first game. Each playing is a new entity, is a new experience. So it's not the same game over and over. It's a new game. It's a new use. And that's why it's not even asur l'noyev l'ftoyach, and puzzles that have that backing should be a problem. Let me use the last 7 minutes to apply this in a contemporary backing to it, with a contemporary twist to it. Someone once asked me a very insightful question. The question was asked when they first started using the fax machine. And he knew, he did his homework. And how does fax transmit a paper from one side of the world to the other? It doesn't fly through the air. It breaks down the lettering, the writing, into small dots. It sends the dots, and therefore it sort of like reimposes all those millions of dots on the receiving end. And basically a fax, he asked me, if I gave the share about Tchud and Daka many years ago. So his assumption was that if we say, like the Marash Halevi, that Tchud and Daka doesn't constitute ksiva, so why is sending a fax, why is that considered ksiva regarding Chalamoid or Shabbos or Yom Tov? It's only Chud and Daka. So I told him, you missed the point. When is it Chud and Daka a heta? When it has no kiyum to it, when it's not on a paper. If someone were to write dots and write out his name with dots on a paper, that would be awesome. The Svar Rasha Levi it's independent dots on hundreds of pages, have no connection one to the other. But if you put dots out and you write your name out with dots, of course that's ksiva. And that is the fax machine. It reimposes those millions of dots onto a paper, and that constitutes a real ksiva. Another interesting question of puzzles on Cholamoyed, when we refrain from writing, it's not necessary. So besides the fact that the puzzle, we will say that the puzzle is a Tzorech HaMoyed for the children, but it's also a ksiva she'enim miskayemes because you take it apart. And on Cholamoyed, there is a specific heta for ksiva she'enim miskayemes, and I saw the Shevet Kasi allows puzzles for children on Cholamoyed for the svar that it's asur l'noyel v'vtoyach, and it's basically not miskayemes, and also the tzorech moyed. We had a fascinating shaila in someone's sukkah. He had a basukas teishvu shivas yomim sign, but it was illuminated with electricity. Basically, it looked like a dark picture. When you plugged it into the wall, it illuminated, and it very beautifully shown the message basukas teishvu shivas yomim. So we were talking, I guess, sort of an academic question, to plug that light in on Cholamoyed, would that be considered ksiva? Because really, right now, it's illegible. It's not noticeable. It's all dark. But that lights up the writing that you want to see. But the answer is that that's not ksiva. If the ksiva is there, you have to just give it some light to it. You're not saying you're writing that ksiva. Where this has an implication in halacha is what I meant with Rabbi Gottesman learned with you earlier, the tshuva of the Machzor Liyo, one of the great poskim about with there, undoubtedly one of the trailblazers in so many of the sugyas that we enjoy after he spent months of Ian HaTorah learning. He discusses the fever setup, that if someone had no fever, the end would light up. If there was a temperature of concern, an F would illuminate. So his point is, even though the N and the F is written there, but it's not legible as it is. And basically, when you put it to your forehead, it gives out lighting, and that causes it to be more legible. And that he considers a ksiva she'ein miskayemes, because it's right away after a while, the energy that you created with your heat, that goes away. But basically, he does give certain allowance for a chayla she'ein by sakana, which of course would be if someone has a COVID concern that's typically could be a chashash of a chayla, even sheyesh by sakana perhaps, but certainly a minimum she'ein by sakana, and he has to take his temperature. He's makel in those cases that it's worst scenario is ksiva she'ein miskayemes, and would not be a problem when there's a great need. The poskim discussed.
For the LED thermometers?
What's that?
The current LED thermometers you put in your mouth, same sock?
The same idea, right? It's not more than ksiva she'ein miskayemes, and it's even though the Maisa, it's the LED has less of a chashash than a regular lighting. You understand that in this respect. So again, it's something that we try to avoid because we avoid these kulas, but it's definitely something that he could write there in that tshuva is considered a gram or not. But the point is that there's another fact that I want to make a point is when you have the Ha'intik Poskim, I'm talking about probably 30 years ago, when they discussed about using a phone on Chol HaMoed. Why is ksiva come to Chol HaMoed? Because typically when you use a phone, it lights up on the screen what you're, who you're calling, you make numbers and your text messaging. So Rabbi Yashiv writes in the Mavakshei Torah, you say that ksiva is only when you print it out. On a screen, it's not yet ksiva. You go to an ATM machine and the money machines that you're there for the meters and all these variety of questions. It basically has to be a ksiva that's printed out. On a screen doesn't have the status of ksiva. Where this is negeya, if someone wants to go into the bank, should he write out fill out a deposit slip or use the ATM machine? Stick with the ATM machine because there's no ksiva. Of course, if you ask a printout of the receipt, that would qualify as a ksiva. But basically, just using the machine does not constitute ksiva in Hilchos Chol HaMoed.
This is a psak kloli that all computer writing is not ksiva miskayemes?
On Chol HaMoed. On Chol HaMoed.
Chol HaMoed. But what about
Right.
Shabbos?
Shabbos, you have to talk about it. I mean, that would be, it's the same. It's not the heter of Chol HaMoed. Chol HaMoed is writing. I'd rather not get into that if I can't do it properly. But I was talking about Chol HaMoed. Why was I saying that? I'll tell you why I was saying that. Because again, when Chol HaMoed, people use phones and computers, and they rather not print out. And they're right, as long as you don't print it out, they will have the heter that is not a ksiva. Let me tell you two more fascinating shilas. The question, maybe an archaic question, but I think it's beautiful. The question about recording someone's shir on Chol HaMoed. You go to Gishmak Shir, you want to record it. So one of the places, I'm not going to say his name, he said that would be a form of ksiva. And unless it's a davar of it, a tzarech hamoed, you shouldn't record something on Chol HaMoed. Why? He says the following thesis, if you could call it as such. If I write Braille writing or Chinese, and no one in this whole koil knows how to decipher it, but it's still ksiva, because after all, it's legible and it's readable for those that know how to discern Braille or Chinese. So he says on a tape, it's the same yesod. A tape has lettering. It has to be deciphered by a tape recorder or a CD, whatever it may be. But there is a writing. Baraya, it could translate it into a beautiful shir. So that was considered ksiva on Chol HaMoed and has all the restrictions on ksiva on Chol HaMoed. Now, why that's not correct, and I saw Taka the Tzedakah Mishpat of Yankel Bloy points that out, it's not true factually. In Lumdus, it's nice, but it's not true. Because on a tape, there is no ksiva. It's magnetic waves that has the ability to give over the sound that it's supposed to be portraying, but it's not ksiva. And the last question, I remember this very vividly, it must have been 20 plus years ago. The Aguda sponsored a shir and was given by Rabbi, by the Shmir Shabbos Kosev, Rav Neiworth, and this was when they started using computers to check Sifrei Torah. And they asked Rav Neiworth, what about Mechik Hashem? Because when you close the computer or you shift from one column of Sefer Torah to the other one, you're erasing the Shem Hashem. So his response was, this ksiva is azoy, 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 azoy. And what he was saying was that on a computer, it's not the actual writing that we have in Hilchos Mechik Hashem. It's these pixels, these lights, these millions of lights, whatever the numbers are by now, but that are constantly flashing to keep it going, the image to keep going. But it's not that you are actually writing something. And I guess that was a form of chud and dakim, that it's not a ksiva. It's not like there's a writing and you're erasing it. It's being portrayed as writing, and therefore it would not be ksiva, and it would not be mechika, at least regarding mechik Hashem. Thank you all for listening. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.